Chapter 4. As the bus pulled out of the terminal, I remembered I'd forgotten to drag the trash can to the curb for pickup tomorrow. That would be Dad's first clue I was gone. I managed to say goodbye to the house, and I remembered thinking that I was forgetting something as I watched the bats dance in and out of the glow of streetlights. I was too worried to worry about anything else but leaving now. I settled into an empty seat in the back of the bus by the bathroom. The faded cushion smelled like an ashtray, and I leaned my head against the window and stared back at the terminal as we pulled on the highway. I reached down from my bag and pulled out the stack of pictures I'd swiped from the album, A Secret History. I craned my neck above the seat to make sure no one in the bus was looking back in my direction, and then I started leafing through the piles. The first picture of my mother wasn't really a picture of her at all, but of her boot. It was an original black and white photo from a newspaper clipping, and there was a chubby, middle-aged woman with a bad perm dressed like a female wrestler in a Halloween mask, and what looked like cardboard polka dot wings hastily pinned to the back of her unitard. The chubby woman lay flat on the ground, knocked out, a single stylish boot pinning down her chest. She was wrapped in a lariat pulled taut into the air above her by an unseen force, like her assailant had been magically airbrushed out of the picture, except for the boot. Inscribed in the picture was the following message: "Congratulations on nabbing your first villain. Keep up the good work. Yours in courage, Captain Victory." I kept staring at the pictures in disbelief. I didn't blink once for at least an hour. My mother had been a hero. All these years I had no idea. The questions were just beginning to take shape in my mind. Why had she hidden it from me? Did Dad know? Is this where my powers came from? I flipped over the picture and found a newspaper article folded and taped to the back. The headline read, "Metro City Mystery Figure Foils Ladybug's Larceny." The next shot was taken when Mom was around my age. I'd never seen any pictures of her when she was a young woman, before she met my father. You know how women can be with their pictures. Most of them don't like to be reminded of how they looked 30 pounds ago. But there was a specific reason I'd never seen those. Dad simply never would have allowed it. Not after what happened to him. Not after he'd laid down the law in his own house about superpowers. There were more pictures of my mother, her body lithe and fit in a tight costume, in various victory poses with her own rogues gallery of victims, the Ladybug, Miss Malevolence, Zorba the Meek, Morning Glory and her henchmen, the Pansies, no comment, and this chick called the Quarrel Queen, who had some sort of sonic scream device that poked out of her stomach. God, what a bunch of losers. In these ridiculous outfits, did they ever really pose a threat to anyone? There were a series of group shots where Mom must have joined a C-list group of costumed heroes called Crime Busters. It looked like she was teamed up with a guy who could shoot fire out of one hand and make ice cubes with the other. The entire group was young and tan, their bellies trim held in effortlessly, and you could tell by their persistent smiles that they were always aware when the cameras were on them. There was a picture of the governor himself awarding them with medals of valor. The Ones to Watch article heralded Mom as one of a group of new up-and-coming heroes poised to take over where their Golden Age predecessors had left off. There were also pictures of Mom in her civilian identity when she graduated from Teachers College. She posed with a group of friends, holding their diplomas and throwing their hats in the air. In the group, Mom was the only one looking at the camera, her graduation cap still on her head, a serene smile on her face, her lips slightly pursed like she knew something they all didn't. And then I saw how my parents had actually met. The banner above them read League Tryouts. I had no idea my mother ever got this close to the big time, but there she was up on the platform receiving her official probationary certificate from my father, Major Might. Mom looked elated at receiving official league tryout status, but what you could see in her eyes was the way she looked up at my father. Here she was, fresh out of Teachers College, holding a small idea of wanting to fight for truth and justice with her bag of invisible tricks, and a mountain-sized crush on Dad, one of the most popular heroes of his time. In the next group of shots, you could tell she'd become chummy with everyone on the league. She'd spent this day wandering around their secret clubhouse snapping candid photos. Elastic Elbert caught with his coiled arm down the toilet as he tried to unclog it. Warrior Woman putting on mascara and slathering on some anti-wrinkle cream, showing that maybe that ageless Greek goddess beauty didn't come without a little effort. And the Nucleus and his sidekicks, the Electrons, engaged in their weekly poker night, cigars dangling from each of their mouths, brown liquor drinks resting on the table. From the surprised look on their faces, you could tell my mother had uncanny access, a level of intimacy the mere mortals of the world would never have. The subjects in the last pictures of the series she had more respect for. She'd clearly asked them to pose. In the same fluid cursive handwriting, she'd written on the white border at the bottom of the graying photo, 3 generations of my favorite heroes: Captain Victory, the elder statesman of the group, and according to history, the world's first costumed hero, had his arm around his former sidekick, my father, Major Might, who in turn had his arm around his current sidekick, the Right Wing. Each one flashed a handsome smile for my mother, chins held high, perfect teeth. They each had a raised fist in the air with the 3 middle fingers up, signifying 3 generations of the world's most virtuous warriors for truth, justice, and a better way. I studied my father's smile in that photo and decided I'd never seen him happier or more proud. I remembered the old guy, Captain Victory. He'd been the one to lend my father money after he couldn't get work and the bank seized our house. Up until a few years ago, when I started to get serious about sports, Dad had dragged me with him to the nursing home to visit his mentor every weekend. All I remember was the rotten smell of the old folks' home. Sickly, sweet wafts of disinfectant meant to cover up the putrid smell of decay. The old man couldn't talk by then, so mostly my dad would bring in pictures or read the newspapers to him, stopping after every story to grimace at the state of the world. Then Dad would give me $1 and send me down to the cafeteria to get a bowl of Jell-O cubes. And I'd sit there and watch Dad try to spoon a few shaky cubes into the old guy's mouth. There weren't too many shots of Mom in her costume after that. I guess it was always a challenge to snap a good shot of an invisible superhero in action. Then there was a brief piece in a magazine column that asked, "Whatever happened to Invisible Lass?" The subtitle speculated that it was the ultimate vanishing act. Apparently, Mom had been as careful to hide her civilian identity from the public as she had been in hiding her public identity from me. There was never another mention of the Invisible Lass, and just like that, she was gone. I flipped to another shot, and that's where my parents' wedding pictures began. I lifted the picture of Mom stuffing a piece of grocery store wedding cake into Dad's mouth. The hidden pictures stopped there, back to the normal order of things. After a series of honeymoon pictures, mostly of Mom sunbathing and Dad on water skis, I saw the first shot of my mother in a maternity dress, her belly swollen with me crouched up inside her. She was taking a turkey out of the oven and holding it up proudly while my dad was pointing at her tummy, a goofy grin on his face. I'd never seen that expression on Dad before. So this was it. This must be why I could do these superhuman things. I had inherited powers from my mother. I wasn't losing my mind at all. I shut out a nagging voice in the back of my head that said, "Thanks a whole lot for up and leaving me on my own right now when I could really use someone like, my mother, to talk about these major events happening in my life." Instead, I held the clippings and pictures in my hands and rested my head on the sticky bus window and looked up at the stars and thought about the future. I woke up and wiped a thin trickle of drool off my cheek. In front of me, I noticed a 300-pound lady in a pineapple print muumuu who snorted every time the bus hit a bump in the road. She munched on a fudsicle and stared out of the window. Beyond her was a young mother with thinning hair threatening to discipline her little girl with an oversized hairbrush. The kid couldn't have been more than 5, and she was whining about wanting to go to bed. She had her tiny index finger shoved up her nose, and with her other finger she picked at her long unwashed hair, in a desperate need of some baby shampoo and an industrial-size detangler. We made brief eye contact, and she immediately stopped complaining, just before her mom smacked her in the thigh with the back of the plastic brush. The little girl howled and yanked the brush out of her mother's hand and moved to smack her back when, screech! The bus skidded across the highway. The passengers screamed as the rear of the bus fishtailed into oncoming traffic. The force sent the fat lady's face into the window, and her cheek smeared the fudgicle across the pane of glass. The bus had barely come to a halt against the guardrail when the door burst open and a flurry of dark capes whooshed in. Transvision Vamp, eyes glowing, whirled around, flicking her black cape over her shoulders, and glared at us. I had never encountered supervillains in real life before. I didn't recognize this crew, never seen them on the news. They couldn't be A-listers. Vamp glanced at the driver momentarily, her eyes blazing red. Drive. The bus driver floored the gas, and my head smacked the greasy headrest as we sped off. She turned her attention to the passengers. "Keep quiet and no one dies," she purred. Her eyes bored into us, and we felt glued to our seats. Behind her stare, the bus driver reached discreetly for his cell phone. "Don't try it, asshole." Snaggletooth lisped around his lone fang. He was hanging from the ceiling by his claws. He dropped down and speared the cell phone with one claw, grabbing the bus driver by the collar with his other claw, and casually tossed the driver out the door. He slipped into the driver's seat and slammed his paw on the gas pedal. The lady in the muumuu screamed as we watched the driver fly by us horizontally outside the bus. We sped forward past him as his mouth and eyes widened into gaping ovals. I stared at the driver, suspended in midair for a brief moment, and to my surprise, the moment didn't pass. He just hung there, frozen in time, except for the yellow lines that sped past underneath him. We looked up and saw that he was hanging by someone's hand attached to his belt. The elongated arm and hand slowly pulled him around the bus and inside through the back window. I felt something wriggly and slick under my feet, but my eyes followed the long, ropey arm as it began to retract and wander past the bathroom, under the seats, and across the aisle until it met up with its owner, a short but muscly guy in a scaly green outfit, right under my feet. "We said no victims," Snake hissed at Transvision Vamp, like a grade schooler tattling on his classmate to his teacher. Transvision Vamp massaged her temples with her fingers, and her stare turned a shade of ultraviolet as she peered beyond the passengers into the night behind the speeding bus. "Do you see him?" Snaggletooth asked in a high-pitched voice, panic setting in. His hands shook on the steering wheel, and his claws dug into the hard plastic. "Shut up, asshole, she's looking." Snake craned his neck out of joint and stretched his head out the driver's side window for a better look. "He's right behind us. He can't be that far." "Oh man, he's gonna kill me. He's gonna kill me." Snaggletooth slammed both paws on the gas. "Wait, I think I see something." Transvision Vamp made her way to the back of the bus. "What is it? What do you see?" Snaggletooth couldn't seem to get a grip. "Will you calm down and keep your eyes on the road?" Snake brought his head back in the window. "Screw you, I'm driving as fast as this piece of shit will go. I'm not getting caught by that guy. You don't know what he did to Frank. He caught him robbing that nursing home before the police got there." Snaggletooth wiped beads of sweat from his forehead. "That's urban legend." Snake tried to talk him down. "Maybe." Snaggletooth inhaled deeply through his nose, shaking his head, and then pressed his knees together. "All I know is I plan on keeping both balls and using them till I'm an old man." "Will you both shut up?" Transvision Vamped wiped a smear of lipstick off her front teeth and put her hands on the frame of the back window. "I think I can see the trail he left. Snake, hang me out the window so I can get a better look." I struggled to move in my seat but couldn't. With these guys in the back of the bus not paying attention to us, if I could get up, I know I could take the driver. I just knew it. An old man in the seat behind me began to hyperventilate. I managed to lift my arm up, reach back, and place my hand on his shoulders. I felt my hand burn as his wheezes subsided, but my toes started to twitch. Phantom Girl, Karate Kid, Dream Girl. I had to calm down. I could do this. My leg muscles tensed, but I couldn't fire off the right signals in my brain to make them work. Ultra Boy, Element Lad, Colossal Boy. I yanked my butt off the seat like I was pulling myself off flypaper and stood in the middle of the aisle. Transvision Vamp and Snake were leaning out the window at the back, and Snaggletooth's attention was fixed on the road ahead of him. I struggled to put one foot in front of the other as I made my way up the aisle toward the driver's seat. The lady in the muumuu covered her mouth with her hand to stifle a scream, and her eyes bulged as she shook her head at me. I kept going. "Matter Eater Lad? Light Lass?" I was just a few feet behind Snaggletooth. I looked at his reflection in the rearview mirror, and I could see the panic in his eyes as he blazed the bus forward. With a little luck, he wouldn't look up in the mirror and see me. A few more seconds, and I'd be on top of him. "I found the trail," Transvision Vamp shouted from outside the speeding bus. "Oh God, where does it lead to?" Snaggletooth stammered, his eyes still on the road in front of him. "Starboy, Shadow Lass." I took another step forward and raised my arms to strike. Then something caught my attention from the front windshield. "Hold on, I'm following it now," Vamp shouted, the urgency increasing in her voice. "Shit, shit, 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 shit." Snaggletooth smacked the wheel in a vain effort to make the bus go faster. I squinted and looked carefully through the windshield. A pair of eyes, a piercing gaze, stared into the bus from the darkness outside, like someone was hanging from the top of the bus. The eyes darted around, surveying the scene as fast as possible. Then the piercing eyes locked on mine, and I froze, standing there in the middle of the aisle, my arms raised, ready to strike. "I said, where does the goddamn trail lead?" Snaggletooth shouted. Transvision Vamp shouted frantically from the back of the bus. "The roof! He's on the roof!" Snaggletooth turned his head around to look up at the roof, and he saw me. I let out a small gasp of air, and I could hear him growl as his muscles tightened, ready to pounce. Snaggletooth sprung at me off his hind legs, claws aimed at my eyes. Suddenly the front windshield burst into 1,000 jagged fragments, and a man dressed in black swung himself into the bus. With lightning speed, he leapt forward and tackled Snaggletooth before he could sink his claws into my pupils. The man in black, who had just saved my life, rose before Snaggletooth could catch his breath and began to land a flurry of staccato kicks in Snaggletooth's guts. Snaggletooth wheezed for air. The bus swerved back and forth, and the passengers screamed as we were thrown from side to side. Snake slithered between my legs, his body gyrating forward in a swift, liquid line to the front of the bus. He popped up and resumed human form in the empty driver's seat and grabbed the steering wheel, which had begun to drift dangerously out of control. The bus smacked into a small Honda and sent it spinning into the guardrail. The man in black delivered a devastating final kick to the Snaggletooth's chin, knocking him up into the air. He landed face first on the floor and chipped off the end of his fang. I stood up, wanting to help. A laser beam of light whizzed in front of me and blew a hole through a succession of seats. It stopped me in my tracks, and the passengers dove in all directions. I followed the beam back to Vamp's smoking eyes. She fired repeatedly at the man in black, who flipped from seat to seat, dodging the blasts. He bounced up the seats, making his way closer to Vamp. She backed up against the wall, her eyes glowing green with panic. Snake was too busy driving to help. Snaggletooth was out cold on the floor, and she was about 3 seconds away from a hand-to-hand encounter with the most brutal vigilante on the planet. In desperation, she let loose a torrent of eye blasts at the passengers. The lady in the muumuu shrieked and tried to wedge herself under her seat, and I dove to the other side of the bus. The mother grabbed her little girl and started to stand. The blast ripped through their seats. The young mother's face went white, and the little girl screamed, and I saw that the mother had a chunk missing from her side. She clutched the wound, which was gushing thick, dark blood, like motor oil pouring out of a leaky engine. The man in black turned around to help, but I was already on it. I had her flat on the floor, my hands pressed firmly on the wound, my palms smoldering as they began to cauterize the gash. Blood spurted on my face. This was worse than anything I'd been able to heal, and I could feel the effort sapping my energy. A wave of nausea bubbled up in my stomach, and I fought the urge to barf. The little girl crawled under the seat and whimpered. The man in black grabbed the oversized hairbrush off the floor and disappeared into the shadows under his cape and reemerged right in front of the screaming Vamp. Before she could react, he swiped the hard bristles across her open eyes, blinding her in an instant. A scaly green leg wriggled past us on the floor and knocked the man in black's feet out from under him. Snake's elongated hand followed and kept the man in black busy, while Vamp wiped madly at her eyes, struggling to regain her sight. I looked at Snake, trying with his appendages to drive the bus and fight the man in black at the same time. I saw him mouth "screw it" to himself, and he took his remaining hand off the wheel and wriggled it back to Snaggletooth and smacked him hard in the face to wake up. Snaggletooth opened his eyes and jumped up as the man in black took Snake's hand and foot and tied them in a knot. He threw the knotted limbs around Snaggletooth as the beast leapt for him. "Snaggletooth, no!" Snake screamed, but it was too late. The man in black ducked, and Snaggletooth sailed above him out the back window, yanking Snake out of the driver's seat by his knotted limbs and carrying him with him. Snake's free hand caught the back of the bus, and the two villains flew into the air, attached to the bus like a kid's balloon that had been tied there after a carnival. A dark cape flashed past me, and before I could blink, the man in black was back in the driver's seat fighting with the gears to regain control of the swerving bus. He looked up into the mirror, and his piercing eyes bounced from me to the young mother. I met his eyes and nodded urgently, like I was doing the best I could. My hands burned, but I felt like I could drop from exhaustion at any moment. But I couldn't seem to make them any hotter. I was already reaching my limit. "We have to get her to the hospital." All that first aid training really paid off. The man in black pointed forward to the bridge in front of us and beyond that to the city. We'd be there in just a few minutes if I could keep her alive until then. Stretch my powers just a little further. The man in black leaned forward, determined, and pushed the bus to go faster. We could make it. We were almost at the top of the bridge, the city hospital just seconds away on the other side. Suddenly, a blast of energy ripped through the floorboards, cracking and spitting sparks. It had began to slice the bus in two from rear to front. Transvision Vamp, undeterred by the blood dripping from her eyelids, was back in business, her eyes aiming a blast down the center of the aisle. The man in black looked up at me in the mirror, his eyes pleading. I looked down at my hands, blood from the wounds seeping up between my fingertips. The young mother's eyes were rolling back in her head, so I pressed harder. The effort made me feel like my head was going to explode. The crack in the aisle from the vamp's eye blast was getting closer and closer to us. "Help me," I shouted. The man in black's eyes looked down in resignation for a split second before he bounded out of his seat and threw himself back at Vamp. He backhanded her before she could finish ripping the bus in two, but not before Snake and Snaggletooth had pulled themselves onto the bus. Snake spit a gob of venom at the man in black, who leaped above it. The venom landed in a splat on the floor and partially on top of the old man's steel-tipped shoe. It burned and dissolved the matter underneath it like acid. The old man screamed, his shoe hissing with smoke. I reached over to him, one hand still firmly attached to the young mother, and I covered his burning foot with my palm. I clenched my teeth in pain as my hand burned. Snaggletooth took a swipe at the man in black, and the vigilante flipped up into the air, landing far up the aisle. The puddle of Snake's spit had burned another hole through the floorboard. Snaggletooth lurched forward, and one of his legs dropped through the hole. He screamed in pain as his femur snapped. I squeezed the old man's foot tighter, determined not to let his foot dissolve. "Snake, get us off this thing," Vamp rubbed her chin. "I'm trying." He caught a deep punch into the kidney from the man in black. The vamp rubbed her temples and aimed her vision at an apex of the bridge the bus had begun to climb. In an instant, she sent a shock blast that rippled fissures into the pavement. The bridge began to crumble. We all looked forward in horror as the bus sped toward a gaping hole in the bridge. The man in black swiftly struck Vamp in the windpipe with the side of his hand and jumped back into the driver's seat. He navigated the bus through the holes in the bridge like we were speeding through an obstacle course in a minefield. I struggled to hold on to both the young mother's bleeding side and the old man's dissolving foot. Below me, the middle of the bus was splitting in two, and it slowly began to stretch me apart, like taffy. In a few seconds, I was going to lose one of them, or drop it through the split in the floor, or both. I thought about what my dad would do in this situation, but I couldn't think fast enough. I didn't know how much longer I could hold on. I looked up at the man in black's eyes in the rearview mirror. I couldn't see an expression under his cowl, but I knew his eyes were telling me to hold on. The holes in the pavement ahead of us didn't matter. We were almost there. I could do it. Beneath me, the two halves of the bus parted. "Look," a little girl pointing at the window. At first, they looked like a flock of giant birds. Suddenly, a rainbow of colors lit up the night outside the bus. Sparks of light reflected off the little girl's face, and a fireworks display of bright colors exploded around us. The birds swooped down closer, and I realized they weren't birds at all. It was the League.